I stepped into Carmine's at 8:15 on a Thursday because my car had broken down 2 blocks away and it was November in Chicago and I had a dead phone and a meeting with my father's lawyer. I was already 20 minutes late for. That is the whole story of how I walked through the wrong door. The restaurant looked like a restaurant from the outside. Dark awning, the kind of amber interior lighting that makes everything look like an old photograph. I pushed through the door and took 4 steps inside before I understood that something was wrong. Not wrong in any visible way, wrong in the way a room feels when all the sound in it has been carefully removed. 20 men around tables and not one fork moving. The silence was not the silence of a room mid-conversation that had paused. It was the silence of a room that had been holding very still for exactly as long as it needed to, and intended to keep holding. I stopped. Because I am not stupid. Even when I am acting like I am, at the far end of the room, near a table that sat apart from all the others, the way a throne sits apart from chairs, a man stood with his back half-turned to the door. He was not large in the way that announces itself. He was large in the way that makes you recalibrate a room, the kind of large that is almost entirely stillness, organized into the shape of a man. He was speaking to someone seated at the table nearest to him. The seated man had the look of someone who had recently understood something very bad about his situation. I did not hear what was being said. I was too far away, and the words were low, even, and deliberate, like water running over flat stone. Then the standing man turned his head, not his body, just his head, and I saw his profile. Sharp jaw, dark hair pushed back, a quality of attention I can only describe as total. Whatever he was saying it with the entirety of himself directed at the person receiving it. Then the seated man made a mistake. I still do not know exactly what he did. He may have reached for something. He may have moved wrong. But one of the men at the walls stepped forward, and the woman beside the seated man, I had not noticed her until this moment, flinched so hard her wineglass tipped and rocked without falling. The standing man turned fully. He looked at the woman first. Something moved across his face too fast to name. Then he looked at the seated man. He did not step closer to him. He did not raise a hand. He stood exactly where he was, and he spoke. "You touch her again," he said, "and I bury you tonight." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room dropped several degrees on the strength of 9 words delivered at the volume of a normal conversation. Measured. Specific. The kind of sentence that does not require theater because everyone in the room already knows it is not a sentence, it is a fact stated in advance. Every person in that room looked at the seated man. Every one of them made themselves smaller, stiller, and the particular way of people who have learned that minimizing the space you occupy in a moment like this is the closest thing to safety available. I looked at him. I do not know why. I should have looked at the floor, at the door, anywhere other than the man who had just said something that stopped 20 people from breathing, but I looked at his face. I was trying to understand what I was seeing, what specific category of dangerous this was, and so I watched him the way you watch a storm from inside a window, trying to read it before it reads you, trying to understand the shape of it. He was already looking at me. I don't know when he noticed me. Maybe from the moment I walked in. Maybe from the moment I failed to look away. His eyes were dark and still, and they were on my face with the kind of attention that does not feel like observation. It felt like consideration. Like I had been included in a calculation I didn't know was happening. I should have walked out. The door was 4 steps behind me and no one was between me and it. I didn't. A man near the wall moved toward me. Large. Jacket that didn't quite conceal what it was meant to conceal. "You walked into a private event," he said. "My car broke down." My voice came out level. "I have no good explanation for this. I need to use a phone." He reached for my arm. "Leave her." 2 words from across the room. The man beside me stopped mid-reach. I looked over. The man at the far table had already turned back to his conversation. Back to the seated man who now sat very carefully, very still, as if 2 words about me were all the attention I required and the matter was handled and the room could proceed. Another man appeared at my side, older, face like weathered oak, eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He held out a mobile phone without speaking. I took it. My fingers were not quite steady. I called the lawyer. I rescheduled. I handed the phone back. The older man walked me to a side door. Not the front door. A side exit that opened onto a narrow alley running along the building's edge, and held it open without looking at me directly. "Thank you," I said. He said nothing. The door closed behind me. November hit like something it had been saving up. I stood in that alley for a moment, the cold finding every gap in my coat, and I thought about the room. The stillness of it, the 9 words and what they had cost the air, the fact that I had turned and looked at his face when every other person in that room had looked somewhere else entirely. I did not think about the fact that he had already been looking at me. I should have thought about that. I walked home in the dark. That was the last ordinary night I had. 2 days later, someone put a note under my apartment door. The note was a single sheet of white paper. On it, a 4-digit number, the last 4 digits of my father's bank account, which I had never told anyone. And beneath that, in careful small handwriting, the sentence, "You have 3 days to settle what he left behind." My father, Giovanni Morel, born Giovanni Moretti, who had Americanized himself so completely that I'd spent my entire childhood believing I was ordinary, had been dead for 11 weeks. He died in his sleep in a house I had never visited, in a city I had not grown up in, leaving me exactly one thing, the slow revelation that he had been keeping secrets from me since before I had a memory. 11 weeks of learning the shape of those secrets. The debts were part of it. Not all. I packed what I could carry. This is what my life had trained me for. Packing quickly felt like a skill rather than a tragedy. I had a go bag, a real one. The kind you assemble when you grow up with a mother who leaves on a Tuesday without a note, and a father who is present sometimes and not present other times. And you learn early that stable is a word for horses and geological formations, not for family. I had the bag at the door in 4 minutes. The men were already in the hallway. Not threatening, not visibly armed, though I would learn those are not the same thing. 2 of them in dark coats with the particular quality of stillness I was beginning to recognize. The older one, the same man from the restaurant, the one who had handed me the phone, raised one palm toward me, the universal gesture for easy. "Mr. Salvatore would like to speak with you," he said. "It isn't a request." "Everything is a request," I said. "The answer can just be no." He looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Patience, maybe, or something older than patience. "The no has already been delivered," he said, "by the men who left that note. Mr. Salvatore is the alternative. His name was Marco Ferrante. I learned that on the drive north. He had been with Dante Salvatore for a decade. He had the voice of a man who had delivered exactly this type of message many times to many people and had stopped apologizing for it years ago, not from cruelty but from honesty. I went with him. The estate was 40 minutes outside the city. I watched Chicago pull away through the window and tried to think clearly. My father had known these people. The 4 digits on the note proved it. No one had access to that number who had not been trusted with actual records. Which meant this was not random. I was not random. The only question was what specifically they wanted from me and whether I had any of it to give. The house was limestone and old glass set back from a private road behind 100 yards of November garden, everything stripped and gray and waiting for a season that hadn't come yet. Inside it smelled of wax and cold stone, and underneath those, wood smoke, real fire, somewhere in the back of the house. Rosa was the first person I met. Small woman in her 60s, white streaked hair, hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who has been solving problems since before you were born. She showed me to a room on the 2nd floor without ceremony and told me there was food downstairs when I was ready. "Am I a guest?" I asked. She straightened the towel on the rack near the sink with focused precision. "You're here," she said. "That's enough for now." She left without waiting for my response, and somehow that lack of waiting felt more like kindness than dismissal. He found me 40 minutes later in the library. I was not snooping. I was looking for a landline, a way to call someone who could tell me whether I had made a catastrophic mistake by getting into that car. and I was standing with my hand on a shelf with my back to the door when the room changed. Temperature, maybe? Or the specific quality of the silence. I turned. Dante Salvatore in daylight was what I had remembered and also different. The stillness was exactly the same, the way he occupied space without making a production of it. But in daylight, he was also simply a man. Dark eyes that found me immediately and stayed, a jacket over a dark shirt, sleeves turned back to the elbow, hands kept visible, which I would understand much later was deliberate, a choice he had made long ago about what kind of dangerous he wanted to look like. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." A pause. Not threatening. Just long. Long enough to understand he wasn't going to argue, wasn't going to repeat himself, was simply waiting for the decision that would be made. He moved to the desk. I stepped back without meaning to, and he noticed, and something in his expression registered the noticing without commenting on it, and he sat and laid one hand flat on the surface. "Your father owed money to people who believe his debt transfers to his estate, and therefore to you. My father's estate is $17,000 and a sublease. Not that debt." I watched his face. What debt then? He looked at me steadily. He had the quality I was beginning to notice of never looking somewhere else when he meant to look at you. "Your father kept records for the Salvatore family for 16 years. He retired 12 years ago. The records he kept are relevant to people who are currently making moves against this family, and they believe you may have inherited access to them." The floor felt less solid than it had a moment ago. I don't know anything about my father's. I know that. No impatience in it, just fact. They don't, or they don't care. Then tell them. Something moved in his expression. Not quite amusement, closer to recognition. That's not how this works. I looked at him, at the desk between us, at the hand flat on the surface, at the window behind him where the dead garden stood in gray November light, and I thought, he is dangerous in a way I have no vocabulary for. And I am sitting in his house, and no one knows I am here. "Your father asked me to keep you safe," Dante said, "before he died." I said yes. I waited for more. There was no more. The silence in the library had the texture of something decided, not by me. "You'll stay here," he said, "until this is resolved." I opened my mouth. He was already looking at his desk, already done with the conversation in a way that had nothing to do with dismissing me and everything to do with the simple fact that in his mind the matter was settled, and settled things did not require further discussion. The cold of the marble under my feet came through my shoes. He was a man who decided things and then waited for the world to catch up. I was not going to be the world. But I sat back down. The Salvatore name meant different things in different rooms. I learned this in increments over the next 10 days, the way you learn most things in his world. Not because someone explained it to you, but because you were present and paying attention, and eventually the picture assembled itself out of what was said and, more often, what was not. In the city, the name was a current beneath the water, something you did not see but that changed the direction of everything moving above it. 3 territories, 2 allied families, a network of legitimate businesses that were legitimate, in the way that a wall is legitimate, useful, structural, and built to conceal the thing behind it. Dante had been Don for 7 years, inheriting at 31 after his father's death, and in 7 years had not lost a single inch of what he had been given. He had, by every account that reached me in fragments from Rosa's quiet commentary and Marco's careful non-answers, expanded the thing instead, not through aggression but through a quality I could only call inevitability. When Dante Salvatore decided something would happen, it happened, and the decision always had the quality of something that had already been thought through completely before anyone else was aware it was being considered. His men moved through the estate with a silence that was not fear. It was precision. I watched this. I had nothing else to do but watch. Rosa told me things in the margins of other things. She would bring coffee in the morning to the small room off the kitchen that I had claimed as my own. Not large enough to be a sitting room, not small enough to be a closet, containing a window that faced the east garden and a chair that had been there so long it had shaped itself to human occupation. And she would stay for minutes, or sometimes 30, talking about the house, about the garden, about nothing specific, and in the margins of all of it were the small facts of his life that were not secrets, but that he would never have told me himself. He had a sister, Julia. She had left 8 years ago and was not spoken about directly. Rosa spoke about her the way you speak about weather that has passed. The shape of it still in the air, the damage still visible. But the storm itself gone somewhere you could not follow. I did not ask more. Something in Rosa's voice told me there was a depth to it that I had not earned the right to sound. On the 4th day, I asked Marco why my father's records were relevant now. 8 years after they were kept, Marco was in the kitchen, eating standing up the way I had noticed he always did. Like sitting was a luxury he had stopped allowing himself a long time ago. He looked at me for a moment that was longer than a casual look. Because the person asking for them is making a move, he said. And he needs them to make it credible. Who? Enzo Coretti, former capo. He went back to his food. He believes this family should be his. And it isn't because the Dawn chose differently. And the choice held. I thought about that. Does Enzo know I don't have the records? Marco looked at me again with that not quite readable expression. He knows everything he needs to know, he said. That's the problem. On the 6th day, I was in the East Garden despite the cold because I needed to be outside, needed to feel weather that was not controlled by someone else's preferences, and I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me and did not turn because I knew the specific weight of those footsteps by then, which disturbed me more than the footsteps themselves. Dante stopped a few feet away. He stood there in silence long enough that I almost turned, and then I did turn, because not turning had become an act of will, and I was tired of the effort. He was looking at the bare garden, not at me. Or he had been looking at me, and shifted when I turned. I noticed both things. Rosa says you haven't been sleeping, he said. Rosa has opinions about everything. She's usually right. I pulled my coat tighter. The cold had teeth. I'm sleeping fine. He didn't respond to this, which was a form of response. You knew my father, I said. It wasn't a question. I had been arranging this into a sentence for 3 days. Yes. For how long? A pause. Longer than you knew him? Something about that landed oddly. Not like an insult, like a bruise, the kind you don't remember getting until you press on it. I looked at him sideways. The cold had done something to his face, sharpened it, or removed the controlled surface of it by degrees. He looked tired. Not weak tired, the tired of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that they no longer notice the weight consciously, but their posture knows it. Why did you say yes? I asked. When he asked you to keep me safe, you didn't have to. He turned and looked at me then, full, direct, the same quality of attention from the restaurant, except now I was close enough that I could see that it was not coldness. It was concentration, as if I were something he was trying to understand before he committed to a conclusion. No, he said. I didn't. He walked back inside. The door shut behind him with the specific click of a lock that is very good at being quiet. I stood in the dead garden in the November cold and felt, for the first time in 11 weeks, something other than the flat, careful distance I had been maintaining from everything. I felt unsettled, specifically, precisely, in his direction. I didn't sleep that night either. 2 hours before dawn, Marco's phone rang. I heard it through the walls. The old house carried sound in unexpected ways. I heard Marco's voice, too low to make out words, and then the sound of boots on the stairs. And then quiet. The threat had a name now. It had a timeline. Neither of those things had been shared with me. But I had been in his world long enough to recognize the specific silence of people who were preparing for something. The threat materialized, not as violence, but as a photograph. Marco showed it to Dante. I was not meant to see it, but the library door was open and I was in the hallway and I saw Marco's face when he laid it on the desk, and I saw the way Dante went stiller than usual, which was saying something before he picked it up. The photograph was of me. Leaving my apartment building, the morning before I had come here. 3 days before I even knew this world existed. I was already in it. Someone had already placed me in it, had already decided I was relevant, had already been watching me, before I walked through the wrong door. This was the thing I could not reconcile. I said nothing. I went back to the small room off the kitchen, and I sat in the chair by the east window, and I looked at the garden for a long time without seeing it, because I was trying to figure out whether the photograph changed everything or only the parts of it that I had been most carefully not examining. He found me there an hour later. He did not knock. The door was open. He stepped inside the room. It was not made for two people, it was barely made for one, and he was not a small man, and stood with his back to the wall beside the door frame, as though choosing the position that made him least likely to be in my space. "You saw," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. I kept my eyes on the window. "The photograph was taken 12 days before you came into Carmine's," he said. "Coretti's people. They had been watching you since your father died." I turned to look at him. "And you?" A pause. "The honest kind." "I was informed of their interest," he said. "I placed my own people on your building 2 days after, so I was being watched by 2 different sets of people." "Yes." "Did you know I was going to walk into Carmine's?" "No." Something that might have been wry moved across his face, briefly. "That was not planned." I looked at him for a moment. "But you had already decided I needed to be here. I had already decided you needed to be somewhere safer than a 3rd-floor apartment with a deadbolt." This was not the same thing as what I had said, and we both knew it. I let it stand between us. He was, I had learned, the kind of man who said exactly what he meant, and not one word more, which meant that what he did not say required as much attention as what he did. The space between his sentences was where the actual information lived. "What did my father ask you?" I said. He did not look away. "He asked me to make sure you were all right when things got complicated." "That's not specific." "No," he said. "It wasn't." He moved just slightly, just a shift of weight, and the room, which was very small, rearranged itself around him. I was aware of how close the walls were, the cold outside pressing against the glass, the wood smoke underneath everything. I was aware, in the specific way of trying not to be aware, of his hands. He had put them in his pockets, which was not a thing I had seen him do before, and I registered it without understanding why I noticed it. "I want to know what his records say," I told him. "If it's my name that's making this dangerous, I deserve to know the shape of the danger." He looked at me for a long moment. The quality of this look was different from the others. Still concentrated, still entirely present, but with something underneath it I had not identified before, as if whatever calculation he had been running about me had reached a new variable. "All right," he said. I had not expected that. My next argument died half-formed. He went to the desk in the corner of the room. I had been using it, there were books on it, my handwriting on 3 sheets of paper. And he stopped, and for just a second, he looked at what was on the desk with an expression I caught only in profile. Something that passed very quickly through his face and was gone before I could name it. He turned. He was a foot away from me. The room was very small. Elena. He said my name the way he had said it in the library that first day, not as address but as emphasis. "This is the thing I need you to attend to." And I found, standing that close, that the thing I was attending to was the narrow scar along his left jaw. Barely visible. The kind left by something that had moved fast, and the fact that he smelled like cold air and something underneath it, cedar maybe, and below that something that had nothing to do with anything that came from a bottle. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving." I didn't know what to say. That was unusual. I almost always had something to say. He took a step back, put an appropriate distance between us. His hand was at his side and then it was not. It lifted, briefly, almost toward me, and stopped. I saw it stop. He did not seem to register that I had seen it. He left without looking back. I sat down in the chair I had been in before, and I noticed that my hands, folded in my lap, were not steady. And I thought, he nearly touched you and didn't, and you are undone by the nearly. I was in a great deal of trouble. He had not meant to reach for her. He stood in the hallway outside the small room and recognized the fact plainly, without drama. He had not meant to reach for her, and his hand had moved, and he had stopped it, and she had seen him stop it. In 20 years, no one had seen him stop himself. He walked to the end of the hallway and stood at the window there and looked at the dead garden, and he thought about a woman standing in a room where 20 men had stopped breathing, turning to look at the man who had just said something dangerous, and the look on her face being not fear, not calculation, but a kind of grief-adjacent recognition, as if she were seeing the shape of something she had been expecting to encounter without knowing she was expecting it. He thought about that look. He had been thinking about it for 10 days. This was not a thing he could afford. He walked away from the window. He showed me the records on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after I had arrived. He spread them on the library table, printed pages, some of them old enough to have yellowed at the edges, some recent, and stood back and let me read. I read for 3 hours. He sat in the chair near the window with a glass of something amber and dark and did not watch me. Or if he watched me, he was careful enough about it that I could not catch him. My father had known everything. I do not mean this in a general sense. I mean, Giovanni Moretti had spent 16 years as the financial architect of the Salvatore family's legitimate and illegitimate holdings, and had done so with a precision and thoroughness that had made him irreplaceable for as long as he chose to remain. He had recorded transactions, transfers, names, accounts, decisions. He had built a system so comprehensive that it was simultaneously the family's greatest asset and, in the wrong hands, its greatest vulnerability. And then he had retired. He had walked away, changed his name, moved to a different city, raised me, or tried to, in his way, and kept his silence for 12 years. I sat back from the papers and looked at the ceiling. He never told you, Dante said. It wasn't a question, no. He wanted you to have a different life. He wanted me not to know what he was. Dante was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, both of those things. I looked over at him. He was watching the window, the glass of amber in one hand, the other elbow resting on the arm of the chair. He looked like a man sitting in a room he has sat in many times, surrounded by a life he built himself, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He felt guilty, I said. About me, about my mother leaving. He thought it was because of his work. Was it? I thought about my mother, who had been beautiful and careless and who had left on a Tuesday when I was 7 and sent a card on my birthday every year until I was 12 and then stopped. I thought about all the things I had built my life around in her absence, the routine, the self-sufficiency, the careful not needing. I don't know, I said honestly. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not pity. Something more careful than that. Something that looked like the precursor to understanding. What happened to your sister? I said. The silence that followed was of a different quality from every other silence he had produced. It had weight. It had an interior. She was taken, he said, 8 years ago by the Messina family as leverage on a deal I wouldn't make. She was returned. He paused. She left the country 3 months later. She didn't tell me where she was going. I looked at him. She looked at me after. His voice was exactly level, and I saw in her face that she understood what I was, and she could not. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood the shape of the thing he could not say. She could not stay near it. Near me. I'm sorry, I said. He looked at me briefly with those dark, still eyes, and what was in them was not surprise exactly, but something adjacent, as if sorry was a word he had not expected in the specific form it arrived in, directed at him, without any other clause attached. She's alive, he said. That's the thing that matters. I thought about what it cost him to believe that. Whether he believed it fully or was still in the process of deciding to. Elena, he said, and something in his voice was different, lower or less controlled, or both. There is something you need to understand. I waited. Coretti is not going to stop. What he needs from your father's records is not just the financial information, it's the names. The political alliances, the people who chose Salvatore over Coretti 8 years ago. He set down the glass. He wants to use them to discredit this family and build his own case. Your name in his mouth is leverage. You, specifically, as Giovanni's daughter, having access to this information whether you do or not, that is the story he is building. What happens when he realizes I don't have the records? He already knows you don't. He's using your existence as the threat, not the records themselves. The room was very quiet. Then why am I still in danger? He looked at me for a long moment. The fire had burned down to low red in the grate. The house was cold outside the library and warm inside it, and the specific warmth of a real wood fire is different from any other. It has direction, it has smell, it has the quality of something that requires tending. Because, he said carefully, I said yes to your father, and Coretti knows that. I understood then. I was not just a piece of the problem. I was the message. My safety was the thing Dante had staked his word on, and Coretti was going to spend everything he had to make Dante break it. I was in danger not despite Dante's protection, but because of it. I sat with this for a while. He sat with me sitting with it, which was the particular form of patience I was beginning to understand was specific to him. Is there anyone you trust? I asked, completely, without conditions. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. I thought so, he said. Yes. The past tense in the middle of the present tense sentence. I noticed it. I filed it away. 2 days later, a man in Dante's household named Teo, 23, the youngest of the inner circle, who had brought me coffee twice and corrected my Italian pronunciation once with such earnest seriousness that Rosa had hidden a smile, was found in the East Garden at 6 a.m. with a broken jaw and a message written on the inside of his jacket, still watching. Teo was alive. The message was the point. Dante stood in the doorway of the garden and looked at Teo on the ground, and something in the line of his back changed. I was standing 6 feet behind him, and I felt it from there. The chapter that had been opened between us. The one with warmth in it. The one with fire and amber and the sentence he had not finished. Closed quietly, and something else replaced it. He turned and looked at me. You don't leave this house, he said. Betrayal was not yet confirmed, but it was already in the room with us. They came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after Teo. I was in the hallway upstairs when the sound reached me. Not a bang, not something cinematic. Just a door opening on the ground floor that should not have been opening, and then voices in Italian, fast and low. And then the specific silence of men who had stopped talking because talking was finished and action had started. I had 4 seconds to think before Marco appeared at the top of the stairs. His face had reorganized itself into something without an expression at all, which was worse than any expression would have been. Room, he said. Lock it. Don't open it for anyone but him. Marco. For anyone but him. Do you understand me? I went to the room. I locked the door. I stood with my back against it and heard the sounds of the house below me rearrange themselves into something I had no framework for. Movement, impact, commands in Italian too fast and too low for me to parse. And then a sound that was not something I am going to describe in detail here. And then silence. And then more movement. It lasted 11 minutes. I counted, then footsteps on the stairs. I knew those footsteps. Elena. His voice. Level. Controlled. But underneath the control, something that had been wrung through the ringer of the last 11 minutes and come out the other side still standing. I opened the door. He was in the hallway, and he had been in a fight. There is no gentle way to say this. His jacket was gone. His shirt had blood on it. Not all of it was his, I would learn, and I cannot decide which was worse to know, that some of it was. His knuckles were torn. His face had a cut above the cheekbone that had not been there this morning. He looked at me with those dark eyes and the specific quality of attention he had always directed at me, and what was in it now was different from anything I had seen before. Raw, not damaged. Raw in the way a thing is raw, when the layer that was covering it has been removed by force, and what is underneath is still real, still functional, still entirely him, but without the finish. You're all right, he said. It was not a question. It was him confirming something he needed confirmed. Yes. He nodded once, looked down the hallway, looked back at me. I took a step toward him. I don't know where in me that impulse came from. I am not the kind of person who moves toward things. I am the kind of person who stays still and waits and assesses, but I took a step, and then another, and I lifted my hand and I touched the cut above his cheekbone. Lightly, the pads of 2 fingers barely contact, and I said, "This needs to be cleaned." He went completely still. I do not mean he stopped moving. I mean the quality of his stillness changed from controlled to something else, something that was not control at all but its opposite. The stillness of something that has been caught so completely by surprise that it has not yet decided what to do. I pulled my hand back. "Don't," he said. Very low. Almost nothing. "Don't what?" "Don't take it back." I looked at him. The hallway was dim and the house was quiet in that particular aftermath quiet, the way a room sounds after something has moved through it. His shirt was dark with effort and things I wasn't examining. The cut above his cheekbone was still bleeding, slowly, in a thin line. I put my hand back. 2 fingers, same place. He exhaled, just once, through his nose, barely audible. But I heard it, and I understood it, and the understanding of it went through me like something physical. I helped him clean the cut in the bathroom down the hall. He sat on the edge of the tub and let me work and said nothing for a long time. I was not looking at his face. I was looking at what I was doing. I was aware of his hands on his knees, of the way he was holding the rest of himself very carefully still. "He sent 6 men," he said finally. "I know. I had counted the sounds. Next time he will send more." I set down the cloth. I was standing between his knees and the wall, and I could not take a step back without stepping into the wall. I looked at him. He was looking at me with the same quality that had been present in the hallway, the layer removed, the actual thing underneath. "Mine," he said. Quietly, the word had no theater in it, no declaration. It arrived like a fact he had known for a while and was only now saying out loud. "You are mine, Elena, whatever it means in this world, whatever it costs." I looked at him for a long time. The marble floor was cold under my feet. The house was very quiet. The fire in the grate down the hall made the only sound. "I know," I said, and I did. He brought me back to my room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not coming in, not leaving, and I thought he was going to say something else. He turned and walked away. I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought, I am not afraid of him. I am afraid of myself, of what I feel inside this, of what his one word and one exhale have done to everything I had arranged myself to be. The danger had stopped being him. The danger was entirely inside me now. Downstairs, a window was broken and the November air was coming in, and the war was not coming anymore. It had arrived. Dante. He stood at the window at 3 a.m. and counted what he had allowed to happen. The girl in the photograph. The girl in the hallway with 2 fingers against his face with that look that had nothing theatrical in it, nothing calculated, just her. Simply present with him in the debris of the worst 11 minutes of the last 6 months, touching his face. He had not been touched like that. Not in... He could not finish the calculation. This was the part of it that was dangerous. Not the 6 men. Not Coretti. He had handled 6 men. He had been handling Coretti for 3 years. The dangerous part was standing at this window, understanding that he had let her into a position where what happened to her was going to happen to him, that the 2 things had become connected without his deciding they would be. He had done this once before. His sister, before he understood what his name would cost people who stood too close to it, he had believed, at 22, 25, that love was a thing you could protect from the shape of your life, that you could hold 2 things separately. You could not. He walked away from the window. Full-scale war came 4 days after the Tuesday assault. 3 of Dante's allied businesses were hit simultaneously. An arson, a robbery, and something I was not given the details of, but that left 2 of Dante's men in the hospital. The message was not subtle. Coretti was not being subtle anymore. I watched what it did to the house. The temperature of it, the movement through the halls. Marco briefed Dante every 3 hours. Rosa kept the kitchen running with a specific kind of purposefulness that I had come to understand was her version of armor. If she was feeding people, if there was food and warmth in the house, then the house was still a house and not a bunker, and the difference between those two things mattered to her profoundly. I helped her. It was something to do. She did not turn me away. On the second day, she told me about the Salvatore estate in Sicily, a house she had visited twice with the previous Dante's father. Stone floors, a garden that faced the sea, a kitchen with a ceiling so high you could lose a whole afternoon in the light that moved across it. She described it with the precision of someone who has held a beautiful thing in their memory for 30 years without being sure they will ever see it again. He should go back, she said. After. Will he? Rosa looked at me with those dark, careful eyes. He would have more reason to, she said, if there were something worth going back for. I looked at my hands and said nothing, because I did not know what to do with that sentence, and I could feel the shape of what she meant pressing against the thing I had been trying to keep undisclosed, even from myself. On the third day, Coretti sent something that was not a man and not a bomb, but somehow worse than both, a message through a back channel to Dante's second, through Marco, which meant either Marco was known to Coretti as a channel, or Marco was the Channy. I did not know this when it happened. I learned it afterward in the reconstruction. What I knew in the moment was that on the morning of the fourth day, I was told that a car was available to take me to a location of my choice, that the immediate threat had been managed, that I was free to leave. This came from Marco, not from Dante. I found Dante in the war room, what he called the back study, where the maps were, where the phones had been ringing for 4 days. And I looked at him across the room and said, "Is that true? Am I free to leave?" He looked at me for a long moment. Behind him, the window showed the November garden. He had not slept in 2 days. I could see it in the specific way his stillness had become effortful. "Yes," he said, "if you want to." The thing that happened in my chest in response to that sentence was complicated, and I did not examine it cleanly in the moment. I thought, he is giving you the door. He is not going to hold you here. He said yes when your father asked, and he has kept that yes, and now he is giving you the option to use the door and walk through it. I thought, if you leave, you will be safer, physically safer. This is a fact. I thought, I know where his hands are when he is sitting still. I know the specific sound of his footsteps. I know the exhale he made in the hallway with my fingers at his face, and what it meant. And I have been living inside that knowledge for 4 days without knowing what to do with it. I need to think, I said. Take your time, he said. I left the room. I sat in Rosa's kitchen for 2 hours, and I thought about who I had been before November. The apartment, the go bag, the life assembled specifically to require nothing from anyone. I thought about whether that life had been safety or just loneliness with a better public face. I thought about what I was becoming inside this world, inside proximity to him. Whether the woman who had touched his face in the hallway was the real one, or the one I was in danger of becoming. And then, late in the afternoon, while I was still sitting with all of this, Coretti's people took Teo from the hospital where he was recovering. Not a message this time. A demonstration. He was alive when they found him. I have to say that first. He was alive, and he came home. And Rosa made soup without being asked, and Rosa's hands, when she set the bowl in front of him, shook in a way I had not seen Rosa's hands shake before. I watched her hands shaking. I thought about the soup. I thought about 30 years of keeping this house, of knowing every person in it, of caring for them in the way that does not have a category in Dante's world, but that is the thing that keeps the house from being only a fortress. I did not leave. I unpacked my go bag. I put each item back in its drawer. I walked to the war room, and I opened the door, and Dante looked up from the map, and I looked at him and said, "Tell me what I can do." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved 2 steps toward me. Slow, deliberate, and he put both hands on my face, and he tilted my head back, and he looked at me for a long time without saying anything, just looking, as if he was memorizing something he was not sure he was going to get to keep. "Stay out of the way," he said, "and stay inside." It was not the answer I was looking for, but both his hands were warm and the room was cold, and the contact lasted 3 seconds longer than it needed to, which was not nothing. The next morning I woke at 6 to the sound of absolute silence. which was different from the silence of the days before. Those had been the silence of preparation. This one was the silence of something having already begun. Something had happened in the night. I felt it in the house before anyone told me, a door somewhere, and then voices, and then Dante's voice above the others. And then a specific and total silence that meant someone, somewhere close and trusted, had been found out. They came for me on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the first assault. The pattern of Tuesdays was not lost on me, though I would understand later that it was not pattern. It was Marco, who had access to the household schedule, and who had been giving Coretti the week's movements every Sunday since October. I did not know it was Marco. Not yet. What I knew was that I woke to a sound outside my window, the specific sound of gravel disturbed by weight once, and then silence, and I lay in the dark and thought, this is the sound of something wrong. I was out of the bed before I finished thinking it. Old training, the kind you develop in childhood, not from anyone teaching you, but from the simple fact of paying attention to the difference between ordinary sounds and other sounds. I got to the door. The hallway was dark and empty. I turned toward the stairs and walked 3 steps, and then a door at the end of the hall. The door that connected to the servants' stair opened. Not Dante. Not Marco. Not Rosa. 3 men, and their purpose was entirely legible in the way they moved. I ran. Not toward the stairs. The stairs were where they were heading. I went the other way, down the corridor toward the east wing, which I had spent 3 weeks learning because there was nothing else to do, and I had always learned the layout of places I was not sure I could leave freely. Second door on the right. Unlocked. I knew it was unlocked because I had checked it 4 days ago, systematically because I could not stop myself. I got inside and locked it from the inside and moved to the window. 3rd floor. A drop to the kitchen garden roof, then another drop to the ground. The kitchen garden roof was pitched, slippery with frozen condensation. I did the calculation. I opened the window. I did not get to the window. The door came in. It was light when I became fully aware again. Not natural light. Electric light, harsh and specific. A single bulb in a low ceiling. My wrists were bound, but not uncomfortably so. They were not trying to hurt me. Not yet. The message they were sending was containment, not damage. We have what he values. The rest is negotiation. I took stock of my body. Sore along one side where I had gone down, nothing broken. I was on a concrete floor in a room that smelled of damp and old oil. The cold had teeth. I thought about Dante's face in the war room, 2 hands on my jaw. The 3 extra seconds. I thought about Rose's hand shaking. I thought, I am not going to perform terror here. There is nobody to perform for, and it is wasteful, and I will need everything I have. I counted the room instead. 1 door, metal, no gap at the bottom. 1 bulb. No windows. Approximately 12 by 15 feet. The floor was bare concrete. In the corner, a water pipe ran floor to ceiling. Old, galvanized, the kind in buildings built before 1960. I went to the pipe and I hit it 3 times in a simple pattern. Nothing. I hit it again. Different pattern. Somewhere far away, a vibration. I sat against the wall and I waited, and I did not let myself think about what was happening in the world outside this room. I let myself think about one thing only, what needed to happen in the next minute, and the minute after that. Hours passed. The light did not change. The cold did not change. At some point, I had lost time, which I had not let myself track precisely, because tracking time creates an ending point, and I did not want an ending point. The door opened. Enzo Coretti looked exactly like Dante in the way that a reflection in dark water looks exactly like the thing above it. The shape is right, the proportions are right, and the wrongness is entirely in what the water is made of. He was the same age, roughly, the same type of stillness, the same quality of attention, but where Dante's stillness had always felt like something held in, coiled, restrained, capable of becoming something else. Coretti's stillness felt like a rival, like a man who had removed every friction from himself and was now moving purely. There is a word for that. I had read it in a different context once. Entropy reversed, a system that has compressed itself until there is no give left in it anywhere. Giovanni Moretti's daughter, he said. He said it thoughtfully, like a man holding an object up to light. That's not my name, I said. He looked at me for a moment. No, he said, but it's useful. He sat down on a chair that had not been in the room when I arrived. Someone had brought it, and he crossed his legs and he looked at me with a quality of intelligence that I did not find comforting. I want you to understand, he said, that this isn't about you. That's never reassuring when someone says it. Something moved in his face. Not warmth, something that might once have been capable of warmth, emptied. It's about what he did, he said. Dante. What he took from me. 7 years ago he was given something that should have been mine, and he's had it for 7 years, and now I'm going to take it back. I looked at him. The cold concrete through my clothes, the single bulb, the dawn position, everything it includes. I thought about what Dante had said. He's what Coretti could have built. I thought about the mirror and the water. I thought about the capacity to stop. You were passed over, I said. Because Dante's father preferred a son he understood. His voice stayed level, not even bitter. That was the disturbing part. Bitterness implies wound. This was past wound. And what Dante has made of it, the respect, the loyalty, I'll admit it. He built something worth taking. He didn't take it from you. He was given what I earned. I said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. I had nothing he wanted. My existence was the leverage, and the leverage was already applied. He stood. Dante will come for you, he said. When he does, everything he has built will be in this room. That's what this is. He left, the door locked. I sat in the cold and I thought about a man who was, at this exact moment, tearing this city apart to reach me. I thought about what I was going to have to do to stay alive long enough for that to matter. I went back to the pipe. I hit it 3 times, then 2, then 3 again, and waited. He came at dawn. I heard it before I saw it. Not the door, which stayed locked, but the building itself. Vibrations in the floor and the walls. The specific tremor of things happening on other floors that moved through concrete and pipe and stone. Impact. Movement. The abrupt stop of sounds that had been happening and then weren't. I pressed myself to the wall beside the door and I held the section of pipe I had spent the night loosening. Old building, old joints. The elbow fitting had taken 3 hours and torn my hands, but it came free just before the light changed from night black to the specific pre-dawn gray that seeps through even concrete. 12 minutes of the building talking to itself, then silence, then his voice outside the door. 2 words, stand clear. I moved. The door came in, and Dante came through it, and he was not the man I had met in Carmine's or the man who had sat across a library desk or the man who had held my face with 2 warm hands. He was something that wore the shape of that man and contained, instead, the pure distillate of 20 years of being the thing that his world had made him. No finish, no restraint. His eyes found me immediately, and the change that moved through him when he found me intact was the only soft thing in the room. Can you walk? He said. Yes. He moved to me and he checked, hands on my arms, my face, my wrists, quick and thorough, reading me the way a doctor reads a patient, the way a man reads the only thing in the room that matters. 2 of his men flanked the door behind him. The hallway beyond them was something I chose not to examine too closely. Marco, I said. Something shifted in his jaw. Later. Dante, later. He took my arm and we moved. There is no clean way to describe the building. 3 floors, and what had happened on each of them in the last 15 minutes was legible in the silence left behind. Dante moved through it the way water moves through rock, not around, through. And I stayed in the channel of his movement, and I did not look at most of what we passed, and he did not look back to check on me, which I understood was its own form of respect. He was trusting me to keep pace, and I kept pace. We came out on a loading dock at the back of the building into early morning dark and cold that hit like physical contact. A car. Marco's replacement driver. Young, silent. Dante folded me into the back seat and got in beside me and the car moved. For 3 minutes neither of us said anything. Then his hand, which had been on the seat beside mine, moved. He put it over my hands, both of mine, covered by one of his, and he held them without speaking, and I felt every hour of the last 12 hours land on me at once, the weight of them, the cold and the dark and the pipe in the corner and the specific effort of not performing terror, and something in my chest broke open a little. I did not cry. I sat in the moving car in the early morning dark and I held onto his hand with both of mine and I breathed. "I know," he said, very quietly, not explaining anything, just confirming that whatever was happening in me was visible to him and that he was present for it. "Marco," I said again. A pause. "Yes." I thought about 10 years, a decade of walking alongside someone you trusted. I thought about Marco's face when he had put the phone in my hand the first night, the practiced calm of it, the voice that had stopped apologizing long ago. I thought about Leah, his daughter. Had Rosa mentioned a daughter? Something, a name. I had heard it in passing. "He had a reason," I said. Dante was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, Chicago was beginning to reassemble itself from darkness into its early morning self, and the sky over the lake was doing something complex in the east. "His daughter," he said finally. "Coretti had her, since summer." He paused. I didn't know. There was so much in the last 3 words of that sentence. I didn't know, meaning he should have told me. He didn't tell me. I would have helped him, and instead he chose this, and I cannot make it not cost me what it costs me, what it costs me. "What happens to him?" I said. "I don't know yet." I looked at his profile in the low light. The cut above his cheekbone had healed, leaving a thin line that would probably scar. His hands over mine were warm and large and entirely steady. "Thank you," I said. He turned and looked at me. The quality of the look was the same one I had first seen in the restaurant. Concentrated, entirely present, something underneath the concentration that had been getting clearer and clearer over 7 weeks until now, in the low light of a car moving through pre-dawn Chicago. It was fully legible. He did not say anything. He looked at me, and I looked back at him, and neither of us looked away. Coretti was still out there. We both knew what the next 12 hours meant. The final confrontation was organized in the specific sense that Dante organized everything, completely, efficiently, without a single wasted move. It took 4 days of preparation, 4 days in which I was back at the estate and the house had a different quality. Not the holding still of the weeks before, but the specific purposefulness of something moving toward a conclusion. Marco was gone. He was gone in the sense of having been removed from the inner circle, quietly, without theater. His position emptied and filled by Dante's cousin Rath, who was 28 and serious, and looked at me when I entered rooms with the wariness of someone who had not yet decided what category to place me in. Rosa cooked more than was needed for the number of people present. This was love, I had learned. This was Rosa's form of it. I went to Dante on the second day. He was in the war room, and when I came in, he looked up, and I sat across from him and I said, "Tell me what the plan is." He looked at me for a moment. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to. Tell me anyway." A pause. He did. Not all of it. He edited as he spoke, removed the parts that were not for me. But he gave me the structure, the logic of it, the shape, and I listened. And at the end I said, "The financial records. The real ones. If Coretti needs them to legitimize his claim and he doesn't have them and thinks I do, use that. Use me in that. Elena, I'm not asking to be in danger. I'm asking to be useful. There's a difference." He looked at me across the map-covered table. The fire was low. The house was quiet. He had the look of a man examining something he had considered from a distance and was now considering from close range, and the re-examination was changing the conclusion. "All right," he said. He used me as the anchor. The fiction was simple. I had made contact with a neutral party, offered to exchange the records I did not actually have, for safe passage out of the city. Coretti, whose intelligence network had been compromised in the rescue operation, believed it. He came to the meeting himself. He should not have come himself. What happened in that warehouse on the south side on a Thursday night I am not going to render in detail. I was present for the first part of it and removed before the last part, and I think that was the right division. Dante had positioned me at a specific remove, close enough to be useful, far enough that what happened at the center of it was not something I had to stand inside. What I saw, Coretti and Dante facing each other across a space not much larger than the library at the estate, what I felt in the room was something that I could only call recognition. Two men who understood each other completely, in the worst possible way. The same intelligence, the same capacity for strategy, the same quality of stillness. And between them, the difference that had always been the whole question. One of them still had a limit. The other had burned through every limit available years ago and was now running purely on direction and momentum. What I heard. Dante's voice, level and quiet. Coretti's voice, equally level. I could not make out words from where I was standing. The exchange was brief. What happened next, I heard. When it was over, Dante walked out of the warehouse and across the concrete floor to where I was standing. And he stopped in front of me. And he looked at me. And I looked at him, and neither of us needed to speak for several seconds. He had won. He was not unmarked by it. "It's over," he said. 2 words, level and quiet. The way he had said every important thing. Outside, the sky over the lake was doing that thing again. The complex, slow reorganization of dark into something that was not yet dawn, but was no longer night. The house was quieter after, not peaceful, quiet. The distinction mattered. Peace is an absence. This quiet was full of things. The processes of deciding, rebuilding, accounting for what had been lost and what remained. Dante spent 2 weeks in meetings that ran through dinner and past midnight. He ate when Rosa put food in front of him, which he did with the specific purposefulness of someone who had decided this was her contribution to the stabilization effort. I was still there. I had not been asked to leave. I had not been given a timeline. I existed in the house in a state that was no longer captive and not yet something with a name. And I had been in the house long enough that the specific quality of its daily life had become my daily life. The early morning cold, the wood smoke, the sound of Italian spoken in the back rooms when the guards changed at 6, Rosa's commentary in the kitchen. On the 10th day, Marco came to the house. He did not come inside. He stood at the gate, and Dante went out to him, and I watched from the library window. They stood in the cold for 20 minutes. I could not hear. At the end of it, Dante put his hand briefly on Marco's shoulder, once. The way you touch something you are not ready to release and are also not ready to hold. And Marco nodded and walked back to his car and drove away. When Dante came back inside, I was in the hallway. "His daughter is safe," he said. Coretti's leverage on her ended with Coretti. "And Marco?" A pause. Something complicated in his face. "He's gone. He's safe." He stopped. He knew what it would cost. He made the choice anyway to protect her. "I can't." He stopped again. "You can't hate him for it," I said. He looked at me. "No. But you can't go back to what you were either." "No." He looked like he was standing in the specific rubble of something he had counted on, that had been structural, that was now irretrievably changed. Not broken, beyond recognition. Changed. Still himself. Different in the way things are different when the world proves itself capable of more complexity than you had accounted for. "I'm sorry," I said. The same word I had said about Julia. He received it the same way, with a slight reorganization of his expression, as if the word in the specific form I delivered it was still, somehow, not fully expected. 2 days later he came to my room. It was late. The house was quiet. He knocked. First time in 7 weeks that he had knocked. And I said, "Come in." And he stood in the doorway in the dark shirt, sleeves to the elbow way he was most himself, and he looked at me for a long time. "I need to ask you something," he said. I waited. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and he went down on one knee, and he took my hand in both of his, and he looked up at me, and the quality of his looking was the most unguarded thing I had seen from him yet. No control, no calculus, just him, entirely present, tired and certain at the same time. He did not have a ring. He had not planned this. I could see that. This was the decision arriving at its moment, and him following it. "Stay," he said. "Not here. With me. Wherever that is, as my wife. As the person I have to answer to. As the only person I have met in 38 years who has looked at me at my worst without looking away." I looked at him for a long time. My go-bag was in the wardrobe. I had not repacked it since the night I had emptied it. "Yes," I said. It came out steady, which surprised me. It didn't feel steady. It felt like the most terrifying and accurate thing I had ever said. He pressed my hand to his mouth once, briefly. Then he stood and he sat beside me on the edge of the bed, and we sat there in the quiet house for a while without speaking, which was its own form of the answer. Outside, the first snow of the winter had started without either of us noticing. 7 months later, we were married in the garden. Not the November garden of dead things and cold that I had looked out at from the chair by the east window. The June garden which Rosa had spent 3 months preparing as if the fate of something important depended on it, which perhaps it did. White flowers I could not name, stone paths that had been cleared and set. The smell of the lake just reaching us over the estate wall, salt and summer, and the particular clarity of early morning. 12 people in the garden, his men, Rosa, 2 cousins, a priest with a face like ancient stone who performed the ceremony in Italian and occasionally in Latin, and who seemed entirely unsurprised by the wedding, as if the Salvatore family produced this kind of mourning as a matter of course. I wore a dress that was simple and ivory and that Rosa had pressed 3 times. My father was not present. I had thought in the weeks before that this would be a sharper loss than it was. What I felt instead, standing in the garden with the lake smell coming over the wall, was something more complicated. Something that included him, his secrets and his debts, and his 16 years of keeping records, and his request to a man he trusted, a request that had resulted in this morning, in this garden, in this life I had not planned for and had chosen with full knowledge anyway. I have to say something about the choosing, because it is the part people get wrong when they think about women in his world, about what keeps them there. It was not that I had nowhere else to go. I had somewhere to go, I always had. My go-bag was at the back of the wardrobe in our room, still there, because Dante had never asked me to get rid of it, and I had never felt the need to. The go-bag and the marriage existed in the same room, and that was not a contradiction. It was just the truth of what I was, and what I had chosen. After the ceremony, after the quiet dinner Rosa produced that lasted 4 hours and included wine I could not identify and was told was older than I was, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into its evening self, we stood in the garden in the low light. He was looking at the garden wall. I was beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him against the evening cool. "The accountant's daughter," he said. "That's not my name," I said. "Not anymore." He turned and looked at me, and something in his face was the same as it had been in the hallway after the Tuesday assault. The layer removed, the actual thing underneath, visible. I looked back at him. I was studying his face the way I had studied it in Carmine 7 months ago, in the amber light of a room that had gone entirely still around a single sentence, trying to understand what I was looking at, the particular shape of this man, the things he had survived, the things he could not recover from, the things he was still in the process of becoming, because of what we had survived together. He went completely still. I saw it happen. The same thing that had happened in Carmine's, the same thing I had not understood. I was doing, and he had not understood. He was responding to. I was looking at him, at his face, directly, in a moment that was not danger but held the same quality of stillness. And everyone around us, every person in the house, was looking at other things, the garden, the evening sky, their plates, their glasses. I was looking at him, Dante Salvatore, who had been looked away from in every room he had ever entered, looked at by me the way you look at something. You are still, after 7 months, trying to understand, not because he was incomprehensible, because he was worth the continued effort. He said, "You know what you do. What do I do?" He put his hand on my face, both hands, the way he had in the war room, cupping my jaw, tilting my head back. And he looked at me with everything he had, without reserve. The way I had only seen him look once or twice before, and only in extremis. "You look at me," he said, "when everyone else looks away." I felt the truth of it land. "I know," I said. "It's still." He stopped. He looked at me for another moment, and the sentence he did not finish was the most honest thing in the garden. "It still lands the same way. It still finds me. After everything, it still costs me something I cannot name and do not want to give back." He did not say any of that. But I heard it. I stepped into him and he wrapped both arms around me, and the garden was very quiet and the lake smell was over the wall, and the June evening was the particular blue that comes just before dark, when the world holds its color as long as it can, before letting it go. His world did not become safe. I want to be clear about that. It remained what it was, the specific gravity of it, the weight of the door that locked from the inside, the sound of Italian in a room that goes still when he enters, the cold of marble underfoot at 3 in the morning when the phone rings and he is already dressed and already moving and I am learning, every time, the specific difference between the sounds that mean trouble and the sounds that mean crisis. I had chosen this. I had chosen it with both eyes open, in full understanding of the cost. The cost was who I used to be, the woman who had a go bag and considered it sufficient armor against a world that would keep asking more of her than she had agreed to give. That woman was gone. Not destroyed, not replaced, but transformed, the way anything is transformed when it stops protecting itself from something, and simply becomes what it was always capable of being. I was the Don's wife. I was Giovanni Moretti's daughter. I was a woman who looked at dangerous things directly, who had stood in the debris of the worst nights of her life and taken stock and chosen, every time, to stay. I was still Elena. I was also something I did not have a name for yet. Something I was still in the process of becoming. He would be patient. I was learning that was the specific quality of his love, not grand, not theatrical, not the kind that announces itself in speeches. Patient, thorough, the kind that checks that you can walk and covers your hands and makes the single declarative sentence land after everything he hasn't said before it. He held me in the garden until the last blue went out of the sky. He never raised his voice. He never needed to.